I want to say another quote because you wrote this long piece in Palladium magazine that I loved, and that was kind of the onus for us to get together and talk. So, quote, with both agriculture and monumental construction much older than what was thought before, we should likely rethink the origins of urban life as well. How old might settlements of hundreds of thousands of people be? How frequently did such civilizations arise, only to fall and be forgotten? I strongly suspect they might not be thousands, but tens of thousands of years older than we believed previously. And then this is the best part, I think, in my thing, is that you've put some skin in the game in this, or at least you're open for skin in the game.
Right.
Quote, I'm happy to take a long bet, that's associated with a not long now, with a qualified challenger skeptical of such a claim, that in 20 years we will know of at least one such permanent settlement older than 20,000 years. So much is there in terms of like what we could rethink history completely, almost, because Gobekli Tepe is this like new point that we now have to address.
A new data point that we have to formulate a new paradigm to explain.
Literally, and then from that may completely rechange how our previous conceptions of not just history, but like just how we feel in the household and how we work and things like that. And then lastly, kind of explain maybe what the long bet is just for the listener, and then also kind of why you feel that you're going to be in the right, I guess you could say. What are your biggest components?
Right. Well, to speak a little bit on the long bet concept, it's a concept from the Long Now Foundation. Maybe it was Stuart Brand's suggestion. I have to look at who exactly came up with the concept. But the view was, people talk about the future all the time, and they get it wrong all the time, and there are no real consequences for getting the far future wrong ever. Right. The famous, Paul Krugman quote, that by the year 2005, it will be obvious that the effect of the internet on the economy was no greater than the fax machine. A very wrong statement from a world-class economist writing in the New York Times, right? Okay. You could joke that that's peak bureaucratic culture for you, right? They don't necessarily know how to predict things very well. But the Long Now Foundation has a mission to encourage long-term thinking, significantly due to a deep environmentalist perspective, because our planet has cycles that are seasonal and cycles that are thousands of years or even millions of years long. And then for humans to synchronize ourselves to be symbiotic rather than parasitic, we would have to start developing societies that can have 1,000-year-long cycles, or heck, maybe even millions of years long cycle. And the Long Now is a reference to this kind of period of 10,000 years into the future and 10,000 years into the past. That's what the reference is. The idea is that this is all now, right? 4,000 years ago, 4,000 years in the future. This is like a tiny, tiny slice of time compared to the billions of years of Earth's history or life's history, right? And we should be more aware that that's basically now, even if it doesn't feel it. Like now isn't this fleeting moment, it's perhaps our entire lifetimes.
It's like ultra present.
Exactly, ultra present, right. Well, and the long bet is a mechanism through which people can register predictions on where the bet is resolved in 10 years or 20 years. And I felt 10 or 20 years, the reason why I made it a long bet offer is because it's that seems long enough for the relatively slow feedback cycle of a site is discovered, permissions to dig are given, funds are raised, digs start, digs are evaluated. Gobekli Tepe itself was discovered in 1994, right? It was discovered also by an archaeologist that was already thinking outside the box, right? Klaus Schmidt was already searching for a site, and he actually found a site that was already dug up in the 1960s.
Oh, wow.
We always, when we're doing science or when doing archaeology, we often see what we expect to see. So in the 1960s, the University of Chicago, together with the University of Istanbul, was digging on that hill. They found Neolithic tools, but they assumed the tops of those pillars that you can see, the audience can see if they go on if they go check out my article that has photos of the site. Those were assumed to be a medieval cemetery built on top of the Neolithic site. No one was expecting buildings this old. So when you see them around, you're like, well, the tools in the buildings, they're probably from different eras.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But, he disagreed. When he saw these photos of it, he recognized a similar style that he had found at other sites, younger sites. And, Klaus was open to the idea that, yeah, maybe there was Stone Age construction. Stone Age construction on a scale that exceeds what we expect of, hunter-gatherers, right? So that openness caused him to rediscover a site rather than freshly discover it. Right. And that paradigm breaking is part of what I want to do with this bet. I received very positive responses from, archaeologists and historians to my article. It's kind of nice when the worst critique someone can give is that, oh, everyone already knows that. I'm like, no. Basically, no one knows that, okay?
No one knows this.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's a great point.
It's like the illusion of obviousness. Right. But still, the bet is over a long enough period that new sites can be discovered during the period of the bet. It's over a bounded enough thing, and it's over the claim that there will be further data points. Gobekli Tepe is not the last data point. There will be new finds. And you know what? New finds, they only push our timelines back. Yeah. Right? It happens much more frequently that we find a new site that pushes our timelines back than it happens that we redate a site to be younger. Sure. So if you were to be a little bit of a futurist and make a simple projection like a weather forecast, I'm going to ask you, in the year 2060, how old do they think human civilization is? I bet they'll think it's much older than we think now. Right now. So if we can bet that and we know that for 2060, why don't we just assume that, yeah, probably it was? And let's start hunting for evidence. Let's start sponsoring digs. Let's look at the places where there might have been settled society 20 or 30,000 years ago.
And then, so what let's just maybe riff on your expertise on this, because I haven't really looked into it other than Gobekli Tepe. But where other in the world are there those sites? Is it more concentrated in the Middle East, or is it more like China, India, because that's very old, Africa, or is it even, are there any in South America, et cetera, and then indigenous here in Native American sites as well? Because I know that Cahokia, maybe not this old and stuff, but all those older. There's a lot more indigenous sites in Native American culture here in the United States that is the same thing, is being pushed back and back. So
and the scale of it is being extended, right? I could talk about a recent set of work that's been done in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, where what they basically did is they flew planes with LiDAR equipment. LiDAR is basically laser radar, right? You shoot beams of light. They bounce back, computer reconstructs what you saw. The nice thing about LiDAR is that it can pierce the canopy, so you in fact get a view of what is under the vegetation. And what they discovered astounded them. It was an order of magnitude, a factor of 10 more archaeological sites than they were expecting from the Mayan civilization, causing them to revise upward the population densities and complexities of a civilization that was already considered, a pretty advanced one, had astrology, astronomy, had writing, had calendar systems, systems of irrigation, obviously massive monumental construction. Those pyramids were not easy to build. So in the New World, I think we're going to see lots and lots of these settled sites that existed that we previously had no idea existed. In the Old World, that is Europe, Asia, Africa, I think we're going to find new sites as well. Currently, the oldest settlements we know of are in the Middle East, though, for example, sites like Mohenjo-Daro near the Indus River Valley, mostly in Pakistan, but a little bit also in India, those are arguably comparably old. We, in fact, know that there was trade between the Indus River Valley civilization and the Mesopotamian civilizations, because we have artifacts from both found.
Is that the oldest Silk Road?
It might be. It's not quite a Silk Road. It's like an ocean trade route.
So
it went through the Persian Gulf and through the very northern tip of the what's today called the Arabian Sea. Right there.
Yeah,
you have hopefully you have a map from Kuwait to Karachi or whatever, right? And you found these seals made to vouch for the quality of goods that were Sumerian seals that are discovered in Pakistan, modern Pakistan, right? Cool. So long distance trade is, I think, one of the surprises that's coming. Now, if I was to make predictions, I would say controlling for the political situation in Saudi Arabia, if it is possible to dig in Saudi Arabia without exposing what was dug up to the potential for politically driven destruction, I think we'll find interesting things there, because Saudi Arabia was much less dry 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, which is also true, by the way, of the northern Sahara Desert, right?
Right, it has changed climate over the years. Yes,
exactly. And deserts, you don't dig much in deserts. So one of my predictions would be there'll be definitely new sites, new buildings found in Saudi Arabia and to a lesser extent in North Africa, if only we look. They're going to be found in areas that currently are not inhabitable for agricultural people, but maybe 8, 9, 10,000 years ago were. And that would be one prediction. And the second prediction, this one actually requires mildly new technology.
Got it.
Is underwater archaeology, right? Because currently we only have a few sites that are really explored. You can view some beautiful video and photos taken of Alexandria, right? The Alexandria of the Ptolemaic dynasty.
Yep.
Exactly. It's sunk under the water. There's been a lot of efforts to do underwater archaeology there with divers cataloging the sites, figuring out what's there. Wow. But Alexandria is a city that we knew existed. It still exists today. It's modern descendant of that city, though a little bit up on land, did not sink.
Right.
Well, what about cities we don't know about?
And is that I've heard now that I don't know. So again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that maybe that is like Jakarta around Indonesia or something. Is that like something as well, like underwater finds? Because there's been some archaeological maybe underwater columns or something like that.
There's a lot of disputes because a lot of these sites are not properly investigated, and it's often disputed what's a natural geological phenomena versus what's man-made. And when it's man-made, there are disputes about dating. And a lot of these discoveries in Southeastern Asia or near India, they're made in countries that don't really have that many resources to spend on figuring out the truth of deep history.
Right.
So they sometimes stay unresolved for decades. And of course, in the meantime, commercial fishing or industrial activity or shipping can damage the sites.
Absolutely.
So I feel underwater archaeology is still a field in its infancy. But the reason why I believe it's promising is that during the last ice age, we in fact saw a rise in sea levels, right?
Yes,
if you look at the Persian Gulf, there was no Persian Gulf. It was all above water. It was just a continuation of the Tigris and Euphrates River flowing all the way to the Straits of Hormuz today. So there's another sunken Mesopotamia right there.
Wow.
Though of course, how are you going to get permissions to dig when it's the border between Iran and Saudi Arabia? They'll be like, "Are you messing with our mines?" Yeah. You'll be like, "No, I'm doing archaeology." You're like, "You're doing archaeology, and you're an American org?"
Yeah. We get out of here.
Yeah, get out of here. Exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting that the political components of all that are really kind of dictating, or at least maybe not dictating, but maybe putting the reins.
They put limits, right?
Yeah, limits. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.